For the benefit of the public, I'm Councillor Robin Cook, Chairman of the committee. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Council has had to put in place measures to enable the Council's decision-making processes to continue whilst keeping safe members of the public, councillors and council staff in accordance with the government's guidance on social distancing. As the regulations for allowing decisions to be made at committee meetings from remote locations expired on the 7th of May 2021, at the annual meeting of the Council on the 4th of May 2021, it was agreed that all council meetings that are not executive in nature will continue to be held virtually from the 7th of May 2021 until such times that social distancing measures are removed, which was scheduled for the 19th of July 2021. An executive decision was made on the 22nd of July to extend virtual meetings until the end of September 2021, to be reviewed in mid-September. The committee, while meeting remotely, will make a minded to resolution with an officer delegated to make the formal decision. The officer will make their decision immediately following the committee vote on each item and will give reasons if their decision differs from that of the minded to resolution. The delegated officer today is Mike Garrity. Public participation will take the form of written statements to the committee, and local ward members who are not members of this committee may make a virtual representation. This meeting is being live streamed to the public, and a copy of the recording of the meeting will be available on the website after the meeting. I'd like to hold a roll call of the committee, please, and would you just identify yourself when I call out your name? Councillor John Worth, Vice Chairman.
Present, Robin.
Councillor Shane Bartlett.
Present, Chairman.
Councillor Dave Balwell.
Present, Chairman.
Councillor Alex Brenton.
Present, Chairman.
Councillor Kelvin Clayton.
I'm here, Chair.
Councillor Jean Dunseith.
Present, Chairman.
Councillor Mike Dyer. No. Councillor Sherry Jesperson.
Here, Mr. Chairman. Good morning.
Councillor Mary Penfold.
Good morning, everyone. Present.
Councillor Belinda Rideout.
Present, Chairman.
Councillor David Took.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you all very much. And our officers attending this meeting today are Mike Garrity, Head of Planning, Economic Growth and Infrastructure. Hugh Williams, who's the Lead Project Officer, Economic Growth and Infrastructure. Phil Crowther, Legal Business Partner, Regulatory. Steve Savage from Highways. Tanisha Williams, Monitoring and Enforcement Officer, Economic Growth and Infrastructure. And Elaine Tibble is the Senior Democratic Services Officer, while Megan Rochester and Pauline Weld are producing the meeting. Right, we move on to the agenda. First item, Elaine, any apologies, please?
Thank you. Yes, we have apologies from Councillor Mike Dyer.
Thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. If anybody's got anything, please let me know now. If not, if something crops up during the meeting, then please identify. Okay. Public participation. Is there any other participation other than that we know about that we've had in today, Elaine?
No, just the representations that have been sent to Tanisha, yes.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Right, so we're going to move on to the substantive item on the agenda. And just before we do so, I'll just run through how we're going to run this one. First of all, I'll invite the case officer to introduce the item. And then members of the public, planning agents, applicants, town and parish councils have been invited to make written submissions, and these will be read out by a planning officer who is not, or officer in this case, who has not dealt with the application. They'll be read out in the following order: public against, public support, the applicant and agent, town and parish council, and then finally the local member. Following the public participation section of every item, I will ask officers if there are any salient points they wish to clarify. I will then ask members if there are any questions to ensure that everyone has had the opportunity to comment. Can I request that members of the committee please direct any remarks and questions through the chair, and I will invite members to speak in turn. Please keep microphones on mute and camera off when not speaking to maintain audio and video quality. At the end of the debate, for transparency, I will take the minded to vote by roll call. The delegated officer will then make the formal decision. So item 4 is the planning application 3172480 DCC, land at Briarswood Yard, Barrack Road, West Pali, BH22 8UB. And that, as you see, is a presentation from, in this case, will be Hugh Williams. Hugh, are you on the call?
I am, Chairman. Thank
okay,
you.
Over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I check, Chair, whether the slide shows now?
Yes,
Chairman?
we can see that. Thank you.
Right.
That's fine. Thank you very much.
I'm afraid this is going to be a rather long presentation. As set out in the application report, the application relates to approximately 0.9 hectares of land that is located towards the northern end of a private road known as Barrack Road. The application was submitted to Dorset County Council in August of 2017 as the then Waste Planning Authority, but was amended in January 2019 and again in April 2021. The amendments involved the submission of revised site plans, the withdrawal of proposals for the erection of 3 buildings for B8 use, the withdrawal of proposals for the continued use of the application site in part for vehicle dismantling, and the agreement of modified descriptions of development. Additional publicity and consultation was undertaken in relation to the amended proposals. As most recently amended, the application seeks planning permission for the continued use of site in part for vehicle repair and associated sales, continued use of site in part for existing concrete contracting yard, proposed use of site in part for B8 storage and distribution, landscaping and associated works. The application is made by DR Smith Properties Limited and is reported to committee on the instruction of the Head of Planning following requests and commitments to do so. From its junction with the B3073 Christchurch Road, Barrack Road extends approximately 1.7 kilometres northwards to and a short distance beyond the application site. Along its entire length, Barrack Road is a public bridleway and as such is a public highway. Vehicular movement northwards beyond the application site is obstructed by gates and fences, but the bridleway continues northwards beyond the application site to Trickett's Cross and links with other rights of way, affording access to both Pali Common and East Pali Common. The extent of the application site is defined by the red edge boundary on the submitted application's site location plan shown on this slide. The land edged blue on the site location plan is understood to be in the applicant's ownership and contains a residential bungalow. No other land in the immediate vicinity of the application site has been identified as being in either the ownership or the control of the applicant. The application site is located mostly in the parish of West Pali within Dorset, but is part located within the parish of Herne in the Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole administrative area. The parish boundary is shown on the site location plan, running north to south through the eastern end of the planning application site. This boundary also distinguishes Dorset to the west from BCP's council's area to the east. Barrack Road is located to the west of the planning application site. Adjacent to the application site, the boundary between the parishes of West Parley and Ferndown runs along Barrack Road. The same boundary also distinguishing between the wards of West Parley and Ferndown South. As part of the application site is located in BCP Council's area, following local government reorganisation, the application as it then comprised was copied to BCP Council, which has responsibility for determining the application insofar as it relates to land that is not located within Dorset. BCP Council has carried out its own publicity and consultation, but has yet to determine the application before it and has made no formal representations on the application to Dorset Council. It is my understanding that BCP Council is awaiting Dorset Council's consideration of the subject application before Dorset before progressing its own decision. Prior to local government reorganisation, representations were received from Christchurch Borough and East Dorset District Councils, whose planning services were then working jointly together. The representations received from the former lower tier authorities are summarised in section 9.5 of the application report. The road frontage of the application site extends to approximately 26 metres, from which the site extends approximately 225 metres eastwards. Apparent on the application site is the line of indicating walling and gates that are referenced in the application report as distinguishing between the inner yard area and the outer yard area. Fencing and gates are also present on the application site frontage with Barrack Road. Between the road frontage and the inner yard area and the inner gates, the outer yard area has a width of approximately 26 metres, whereas beyond the inner gates, the inner yard area has an average width of approximately 42 metres. Within the inner yard area, there is a workshop building that is positioned adjacent to the southern site boundary, and a store building that is positioned adjacent to the site's northern boundary. Both of these buildings are of permanent and substantial construction. Also present, but not marked on the application site location plan, is an enclosed compound area that is located in the northeastern corner of the application site. The compound area is occupied by March and Rowden Construction Limited and used primarily as a storage facility, and is located partly within Dorset and partly within BCP's administrative area. Marked on the application site location plan between the compound and the store building is an area that has for many years contained storage containers. During recent weeks, clearance and other works have been undertaken at the application site in both the inner and in the outer yard areas, some of which will be apparent in photographs later in this presentation, and to which reference has been made in some of the written statements submitted to the public speaking protocol. The works undertaken have included the removal of storage containers from the area marked on the application site location plan. March and Rowden specialise in concrete construction techniques and use parts of the application site for the storage of materials and equipment. I have visited the application site on a number of occasions since 2014 and have also studied an extensive file of correspondence and other records relating to the application site and its usage. In my experience, the use of the application site by March and Rowden tends to be focused in its eastern end within and in close proximity to the compound area. But access to the compound area, and indeed the entirety of the application site, is from Barrack Road and through the western end of the application site. Whilst this is a matter on which different views could be taken, taking account of the indicated land ownership position, and more particularly the site access and apparent use arrangements, my view is that the application site comprises a single planning unit, but one which has for some time been in mixed use. A range of concerns have been raised in representations made about the application, and a good deal has been said in consultation responses and other representations received about the use history of the application site and the regulation of that usage. The adequacy of information submitted in support of the application has been questioned, and some criticism has been made about the brevity of both the summary of third-party representations and of the account of the site's planning history presented in the application report. Both summaries are brief, but in the context of other information available publicly, I do believe that both are reasonable and adequate. However, I have been asked to address the site history within this presentation. The planning and particularly the use history of the application site are somewhat complicated, with the lawfulness of ongoing and recent site usage not clearly established. However, where the lawfulness of a use or other development is in question, it does not automatically follow that the use or development is either unlawful or illegal. Planning legislation empowers local planning authorities to take enforcement action against unauthorised development where there is an apparent breach of planning control and when they deem it expedient to do so. However, the use of enforcement powers is discretionary and should be exercised having regard to the public interest. There are also time limits for taking enforcement action, beyond which breaches of planning control can become immune from enforcement action and the related development become lawful. In May 1993, following the submission of an application by a former owner of the application site, Dorset County Council issued a certificate of lawful use or development relating to both the application site and the blue edged land as shown on the current site location plan, certifying as lawful on that land the dismantling and rebuilding of heavy commercial vehicles and storage of scrap. The certificate and accompanying plan did not distinguish between any primary and secondary or ancillary uses, nor did it identify any limitations or restrictions as to where within the application site the uses could take place. The reason for issuing the certificate was stated to be the site has been in use as a scrapyard for over 10 years. My understanding is that the submission of the certificate application was not made in response to an alleged breach of planning control, but rather was sought in support of and to substantiate an application under the Control of Pollution Act 1974 for a waste disposal licence. Regulatory changes at that time meant that waste planning authorities dealt with a number of such applications. Shortly after the Certificate of Lawfulness was issued, in its capacity as the Waste Regulation Authority, Dorset County Council issued a waste disposal licence relating to the application site, that licence being for a scrap metal yard. It is my understanding that in or around August 2000, a change in ownership of the application site occurred, subsequent to which there has been a history of complaints about unauthorised uses taking place on the application site. The applicant is known to be a private limited company letting and operating its own and leased real estate. The application site has been used by various companies over the course of the period since the change in ownership in August 2000. Various planning enforcement officers have looked into complaints regarding activities on the applications site, but no formal enforcement action has been taken. A number of matters have been addressed through informal engagement between council officers and the landowner and other parties, but I think that it is fair to say that the landowner has always disputed any alleged breach of planning control at the application site, and it is certainly the case that the applicant contends that the 1993 Certificate of Lawfulness remains in force. An application for planning permission was made to East Dorset District Council in June 2010 for the temporary change of use for a period of 1 year of the yard and buildings to depot in connection with fibre optic operation with reverter to lawful use. The land to which that application related comprises roughly the western half of the land forming the current planning application site. It included the workshop building, but not the store building. The depot use was ongoing when the application was submitted. The application was submitted with a statement disputing that a material change of use had in fact occurred. The application was refused by East Dorset District Council in August 2010. No enforcement notice was issued, but use of the workshop building subsequently reverted to use in conjunction with vehicle dismantling. If the introduction of the depot use at the application site involved a material change of use requiring planning permission, it seems to me that the reversion to vehicle dismantling would also have involved a material change of use requiring planning permission. A certificate of lawfulness issued under section 191 of the Town and Country Planning Act certifies as lawful such use and other development to which it refers on the date of the application. The lawfulness of any use, operations or other matter for which such a certificate is in force is to be conclusively presumed. The certificate of lawfulness issued in relation to the application site was therefore a very important document, establishing the lawfulness of the stated uses on the 27th of November 1992. However, much like a planning permission, the benefit of a certificate of lawfulness can be lost through subsequent changes in circumstances, such as the occurrence of a material change of use. Indeed, through the abandonment of a lawful use, buildings and other land with an authorised use can be then rendered with nil use, such that planning permission would be required for any subsequent use involving development. But not all changes of use are material. Only if the character of the land use changes in a material way will a material change of use occur. The point at which a change becomes material is a matter of fact and degree that inevitably gives rise to contention. East Dorset Council clearly took the view that the introduction of the depot use involved a material change of use. My view is that subsequently reverting to the preceding use involved a further material change of use. It is the applicant's contention that the certificate of lawfulness issued by Dorset County Council in May 1993 remains in force, but it is noteworthy that the applicant has chosen to make an application for planning permission and has not made a further application for a certificate of lawfulness. As stated in section 6 of the application report, changes in the use of the application site since the certificate of lawfulness was issued may have resulted in the benefit of the certificate having been lost, but the operational word in that paragraph is may. The application has been made, making clear that the suggestion that there has been a sequence of material changes of use and or abandonment of the certified uses remains in contention. Briefly, the legal framework on the issue of abandonment is as follows. The mere cessation of a use is not development, but if a building or land remains unused for a considerable time in such circumstances that a reasonable man might conclude that the previous use has been abandoned, then the concept of abandonment applies. Following abandonment, land may be left with nil use. Court rulings suggest 4 criteria for considering abandonment, these being the period of non-use, the physical condition of the land or building, whether there has been any other use, and the owner's intention as to whether to suspend the use or to cease it permanently. Court rulings further indicate that abandonment involves a cessation of use in such a way and for such a time as to give the impression to a reasonable onlooker that it was not to be resumed. From the records that I have examined, the impression that I have gained is that the applicant has not intentionally abandoned the land uses referred to in the certificate of lawfulness, and that demonstrating such an intention would be difficult. There is also scope for debate as to whether or not the uses referred to in the certificate have in fact ceased across the entirety of the application site, whether or not the uses of the application site have involved a material change of use, and whether or not any such use associates with a planning unit smaller than the application site. None of these matters are entirely straightforward, nor in my view clear-cut. My understanding is that March and Rowden Construction Limited have occupied at least part of the application site since 2004, and that since that time, at least part of the application site has been actively used for storage purposes, with those purposes including though not limited to, the storage of wastes, including end-of-life vehicles. Other vehicles, including some heavy goods vehicles, have also been stored on the application site. The construction techniques used by March and Rowden frequently involve the use of formwork, falsework and/or shuttering, and the materials stored at the site by March and Rowden include timber and ply sheeting that is used for falsework and formwork component systems, support systems. As noted by a number of respondents to the application, March and Rowden's use of the site includes the assembly and dismantling of such support systems, giving rise to noise and a degree of disturbance, and these activities are not confined solely to the compound area. Vehicle dismantling and other activities on the application site have also caused noise and disturbance. The intensity and extent of vehicle dismantling undertaken on the application site has certainly varied over time and was suspended in 2018, but potentially has not been abandoned. Indeed, it is the applicant's contention that vehicle dismantling could be lawfully resumed on the application site without any further planning approval. Since this application was submitted, I have spent a good deal of time contemplating the lawfulness of recorded site usage and the potential lawfulness of similar and other uses, with clear conclusions proving to be elusive. Ultimately, however, I have not been considering an application for a certificate of lawfulness in relation to the application site, as no such application is currently before Dorset Council. The recommendation on the application is therefore made in the context of officer analysis and opinion, with some regard to potential fallback positions, but with the lawfulness of those potential fallback positions not clearly established. Although others may well disagree with me on these points, as I have previously indicated, it is my opinion that the application site comprises a single planning unit that has a history of mixed and varied use. When taken as a whole, it is my opinion that the application site has probably not been rendered with nil use through the abandonment of all usage, and that the continued use of mixed use of the application site could well be lawful. That is not to say that any mix of uses would be lawful, but in considering the application proposal, I have given some weight to both ongoing and historic commercial site usage. However, I have attached greater weight and importance to the fact that the application site comprises previously developed land within the meanings ascribed to that term set out in the adopted local plan and in the National Planning Policy Framework, and also to the fact that the application site contains buildings of permanent and substantial construction and has not been allocated or safeguarded for other purposes. It is the case that there is some ongoing active site usage against which no formal enforcement action has been taken, and I believe there is a realistic prospect that activity levels on the application site could intensify without an actionable breach of planning control. In processing the application, I have contemplated the potential implications of a resumption of vehicle dismantling. I have not managed to conclusively conclude that vehicle dismantling could not be lawfully resumed without further planning approval, although as far as I am concerned, that matter remains unresolved. However, both past experience and information submitted in support of the application indicates that a resumption of vehicle dismantling would likely have a significantly detrimental impact on the residential amenities of adjacent occupiers. Having tried unsuccessfully to identify acceptable arrangements for recommending that a resumption of vehicle dismantling be authorised, my view is that avoiding such a resumption represents a potential material benefit of the application proposal as most recently amended, and it is in that context that I view the amendment of the application by the withdrawal of the proposal for continued use of vehicle dismantling as a positive, important and welcome change. As amended, the proposal provides for the continued use of the site in part for vehicle repair and associated sales, the continued use of the site in part for the existing concrete contracting yard, and the proposed use of the site for B8 storage and distribution, together with landscaping and associated works. Use as proposed would not be without some impact on the amenities of those living close to the application site, nor without some impact on the amenities of the surrounding area more generally. However, subject to the imposition of the recommended conditions, it is my opinion that the proposal provides for an acceptable balance and mix of uses that is in general accordance with the development plan as a whole. I have therefore recommended a conditional grant of planning permission, but recognise that there are several matters of judgment on which different conclusions could reasonably be drawn. Turning now to look closer at aspects of the site context described in the application report, the northern boundary of the application site is composed of a mix of walling and fencing. Immediately to the north of the application site is a narrow strip of third-party land that contains 2 ponds and several buildings that appear to be used for storage. Beyond this area are paddocks with stables that are used for the keeping of horses, and beyond that area is an area of woodland forming part of Pali Common. The eastern end of the application site is enclosed by a fence that is partly overgrown. Beyond the eastern end of the application site is a small area of scrubland and an agricultural track, and then an extensive solar farm. Adjacent to the solar farm and approximately 75 metres from the application site is a bowl barrow or tumuli, which is a scheduled monument. A further bowl barrow, which is also a scheduled monument, is located approximately 150 metres further to the north. The heritage significance of the barrows rests mainly in their historic and archaeological interest, but the setting of such assets does contribute to our understanding of their function. In this instance, that setting has clearly been impacted by later development and landscape change. March and Rowden's compound and other parts of the application site are visible from locations to the north of the application site, but are generally well screened from locations to the east and to the northeast. Taking account of the site context, including the presence of existing development, intermitting landscape features and distance, in my opinion, the application proposal would have the effect of preserving the existing setting of the designated heritage assets without any further harm to their heritage significance. To the south of the application site, in addition to the bungalow that is in the applicant's ownership, along the southern boundary of the application site are 4 further residential properties, these being the White House, Heathercroft, Pinecroft and Longcroft Brick. 3 further properties, known as Catandra, Virginia Cottage and Longcroft Tin, are located within 150 metres of the application site. Written statements submitted pursuant to the public speaking protocol and which are to be read out have been received from the occupiers of 3 of the properties directly adjoining the application site and 1 of the slightly more distant properties. The boundary between the application site and the third-party neighbouring residential properties comprises a mix of walling and fencing, with the residential properties being set at a slightly lower ground level than the application site. The impact of the proposed usage of the application site on the amenities of the residential occupiers in the near vicinity of the site is clearly an important issue in the determination of the application, and particularly so in relation to impact on residential amenities of those immediately adjoining occupiers and anybody else living close to the application site. Impact on more distant and other occupiers is also material. Although impact on residents and owners living elsewhere along Barrack Road, away from the application site, would mostly be affected by traffic-related impacts rather than any direct impact associated with site-based activities such as noise. A range of concerns have been raised on a number of issues, including emissions, pollution, contamination and pollution risk, impact on the green belt, impact on biodiversity, and impact on landscape character, visual amenity, recreational amenity and safety. The site is located entirely within the designated South East Dorset Green Belt and is also entirely within the Bournemouth Airport safeguarding area. It is also less than 20 metres from Pali Common Site of Special Scientific Interest, which also forms part of the Dorset Heath Special Area of Conservation, the Dorset Heathlands Special Protection Area and the Dorset Heathlands Ramsar, and parts of these designated sites run alongside Barrack Road between the application site and Christchurch Road. The site does, however, comprise previously developed land that has a long history of commercial use and does contain buildings of permanent and substantial construction. Barrack Road also provides the sole means of vehicular access and egress to the site. The proposed site plan shows the existing occupied yard in the northeast corner of the application site, this being the March and Rowden compound area. Other land in the inner yard area to the east of the store building is marked as storage area, with annotations indicating B8 existing and proposed, and B8 general storage and storage of trailers. Storage of trailers being to the south of the compound area. The remainder of the inner yard area, including both the workshop and store buildings, and the outer yard area, are marked as storage area and vehicle sales and parking, brackets, existing vehicle dismantling / breaking yard to be removed. And the existing workshop building is labelled vehicle repair and servicing workshop, and the existing store building labelled general storage. A proposed 2-metre high bund supporting a hedge alongside part of the southern boundary is indicated along part of the southern boundary within the inner yard area, and new hedging bordering parts of the outer yard area are also shown. It's fair to say that this is not the most detailed proposed site plan that I have ever considered, but the plan does indicate a distribution of uses across the application site and defines sub-areas which can be usefully referenced in planning conditions. Additional details that might otherwise have been provided either on or in conjunction with the proposed site plan can also be required and controlled by means of planning condition. On that basis, my view is that the plan is adequate to support a recommendation that conditional planning permission be granted. The main issues in the determination of the application are set out in the report, and I do not propose to go through every aspect of the presented appraisal. However, I have a number of slides that further illustrate the site context, including photographs taken during the past few weeks and others showing the site prior to the submission of the application. The aerial photograph from 2015 illustrates the site context before the application was submitted, with the application site in active use, the neighbouring residential development, and the wider surrounds comprising a mix of heathland paddocks, solar farm, and the nearer of the two bowl barrows. On the application site, the March and Rowden compound area is apparent, as are the adjacent storage containers, and a number of vehicles can be seen parked or stored in the outer yard area. Also apparent are parts of the application site being used in conjunction with vehicle dismantling and dismantling of end-of-life vehicles, and for the storage of vehicles and other items. Areas in front of the workshop building at this stage was being used predominantly for the storage of end-of-life vehicles awaiting depollution. A JCB was operating on a concrete pad, predominantly loading scrap metals into adjacent skips. Other parts of the site had a range of vehicles that were either depolluted or being stored within the site as non-end-of-life vehicles. A more recent aerial photograph shows the application site after vehicle dismantling was suspended in 2018, with many of the end-of-life vehicles having been cleared from the site, but a number of vehicles and other items still being stored, particularly in the eastern end of the site. Zooming out a little, the location of the scheduled barrows is highlighted here in red, adjacent to the solar farm and some distance from the application site. As mentioned, the SSSI and designated European sites border Barrack Road along much of its length and extend northwards and eastwards north of the application site. The close proximity of the designated areas can be seen with the designations overlaid on the aerial photograph. The boundary of the areas follows or adjoins Barrack Road, and the application site boundary also joins Barrack Road. The ecological impact assessment submitted in support of the application indicates that no significant adverse effect on the designated sites is likely, and the submitted biodiversity plan provides for the realisation of an overall net gain for biodiversity. The application site is shown to be located in flood zone 1 on the Environment Agency's flood risk map for planning, and hence is classified as being at low risk of fluvial flooding. The Environment Agency has also advised that the application site and wider area are not thought to be at pronounced risk of groundwater flooding. The site is also not thought to be at a theoretical risk of surface water flooding. Areas shown shaded blue on this plan are recognised as having elevated vulnerability to surface water flooding, with the areas including the pond to the north of the outer yard area, and also an overland flow path that follows the line of an ordinary watercourse to the north. The shaded areas variously representing modelled risks for significant rainfall events at the 1 in 30, 1 in 100 and 1 in 1,000 year time horizons. Concern has been expressed in representations about surface water drainage, and particularly the discharge of surface water to neighbouring properties. Neither the Environment Agency nor Dorset Council's flood risk management team have objected to the application, although the Environment Agency has requested the imposition of conditions and the inclusion of informatives relating to drainage matters. Surface water from parts of the application site drain to a sealed drainage system. Only clean and contaminated surface water should be discharged to soakaways or to watercourses, such that additional sealed drainage systems may be required at the application site, but this is a matter that can be adequately controlled by condition and by the Environment Agency. A number of concerns have been expressed regarding access to the application site and potential traffic impacts. Barrack Road connects to Christchurch Road adjacent to the In Excess Garden Centre. It is not easy to quantify vehicular movements associated with past usage of the application site, and also not easy to quantify the number of vehicular movements that would be likely to be associated with the proposed usage. However, B8 uses are generally associated with lower levels of traffic generation than other employment generating activities. On this basis, a material increase in traffic levels is considered to be unlikely. Christchurch Road is a busy route, often with traffic queuing in the vicinity of the junction with Barrack Road, but visibility for drivers joining the public highway network from Barrack Road is considered to be adequate in both directions. The initial section of Barrack Road is fairly straight and accommodates two-way movements, but the roadway then bends around the garden centre and narrows before straightening and then continuing northwards, with a mix of fields, woodlands and heathland to the west, and further fields, woodland and heathland, as well as occasional residential and commercial properties to the east. For much of its length, the roadway width is such that passing of vehicles travelling in the opposite direction is reliant on the use of passing places, but forward visibility is good, and there are several locations where opposing vehicles can pass. Based on my experience of visiting the site, I would describe Barrack Road as being lightly trafficked, but would note that in driving to or from the application site, I would expect to normally meet at least one vehicle heading in the opposite direction. On that basis, my impression is that it would be somewhat unusual for walkers, for horse riders, or for cyclists travelling along the entire length of the road in daytime hours not to encounter vehicular traffic. I have not personally witnessed any traffic conditions that I would regard as either particularly hazardous, inconsiderate, or unduly detrimental to either residential or recreational amenity, but have noted the concerns reported in consultation responses and other representations regarding such matters. However, I do not anticipate that the current position will be made materially worse by the proposed use of the application site. John Turner's yard, seen here with some parked vehicles, is located approximately 1 kilometre north of Christchurch Road as a commercial vehicle dealer and also an authorised vehicle depollution and dismantling facility that is licensed by the Environment Agency. A little further north, roughly where the white van is parked in the middle of this picture, is the Ace Reclamation salvage yard, use of both of these sites being associated with commercial vehicles along Barrack Road. As already mentioned, there are a number of paddocks alongside the roadway which are used for the keeping of horses. There are also a number of residential properties along the length of the road. The final view looking northwards from Barrack Road is taken looking past the White House to the right towards the application site, with the site being marked by site entrance being marked by recently installed curbstones. The bungalow that is within the applicant's ownership lies beyond the Leylandi trees between the White House and the site entrance. In the reverse view, looking southwest, a March and Rowden truck that had just exited the application site can be seen heading south down Barrack Road, and the roof of the bungalow owned by the applicant is also apparent. The first section of fencing in this shot marks the front of the outer yard area, and the second section of fencing encloses the garden to the bungalow. This shot is from the site access looking east. The photographs taken in July of 2021 postdate the writing of the description of the site in the application report. Since my previous visit to the site in June this year, curbing had been installed and a movable or relocatable building had been positioned within the outer yard area. I am not entirely sure whether it is intended that the building is to be retained where it is currently sited, but its position is such that I suspect that is the applicant's intention. For comparison purposes, here is a similar view taken in June this year, with the green wall beyond the parked vehicles distinguishing between the outer and the inner yard areas. And a picture taken from the inner yard access gates in 2017, looking towards the outer yard area, approximately 6 months before the application was submitted to Dorset Council. This shot is taken from a similar position, but looking in the opposite direction into the inner yard area at the end of July this year. Since my previous visit in June, palisade fencing had been installed, creating a new compound area within the inner yard area, this fencing being approximately 2.5 metres tall. On my previous visit in June, the area was in part being used for storing heavy goods trailers, but was previously used for vehicle dismantling and for the storage of end-of-life vehicles. This part of the site has an impermeable surface with the associated surface water catchment system, the purpose of the system being to prevent the discharge of contaminated surface water and other potential pollutants from the application site. The regulation of the operation of that system falls under the environmental permitting regime administered by the Environment Agency. In this view from July, from in front of the workshop building looking northwest, the cleaned concrete base that was previously used for vehicle dismantling is evident within the new fenced compound area, with drainage channels, cleaned drainage channels outside of the compound area also apparent. My understanding that these channels connect to an underground collection chamber, which is periodically emptied by tanker, the site not being connected to the mains drainage network. This shot showing end-of-life vehicles stored on site in March 2017, with the digger and skips at the edge of the inner yard area. Closer view showing again vehicles in the outer yard area and vehicle dismantling ongoing in the inner yard area. Turning in the opposite direction, the workshop building is utilitarian in appearance, but clearly of substantial and permanent construction. Curtilage buildings behind the workshop building at Heathercroft are set at a lower level than the application site and are also not as tall as the workshop, such that there is clearly an appreciable difference in height between the neighbouring developments. Moving eastwards beyond the workshop building, the site has been partially cleared in recent weeks, with the storage containers that were previously sited adjacent to the March and Rowden compound having been moved or removed, but various items of waste and other materials remaining. Although works were clearly still progressing at the time of my visit, my view is that the changes within the eastern end of the yard are both welcome and encouraging, with various items that have been on site for a very long time having either been moved or removed. Comment has been made about the recent importation of scalpings to the site, and there were two piles of scalpings present when I visited in July. Whether the importation and deposit of such material requires planning permission is a matter of fact and degree. What I saw in June and July did not strike me as representing a breach of planning control, and nothing that I saw in relation to surface treatments, surface water management, or enclosure was beyond or far beyond the landscaping associated works that I had anticipated approving under recommended conditions. With such works potentially having commenced, I have reviewed whether the wording of the recommended conditions needs to be revisited, but remain satisfied that the wording set out in the application report is satisfactory. Clearly, however, in the absence to date of precise details to be considered, there is a need for works to be monitored on site. The store building remains very much as I have always encountered it, save for the removal of adjacent vehicles and other waste materials. Various heavy goods vehicles and trailers remain on the application site adjacent to the March and Rowden compound. And the compound itself remains very much as I have previously encountered it. It is not the neatest storage compound that I have ever visited, but in comparison to other parts of the application site has always seemed reasonably well ordered. It is not prominent in public viewpoints, and where visible is very much seen in the context of the wider application site. Save for the receipt of the submitted written statements, there are no updates to the report, and the recommendation remains as set out in the report. This being that the committee resolved that it is minded to grant the application in respect of that part of the application site which is situated in Dorset, subject to the conditions set out in section 12 of the application report, and recommends that the head of planning determines the application accordingly. Obviously, I'll be happy to answer any questions on the report, but that concludes my presentation.
Well, thank you very much. It's a bit of a marathon, Hugh, but well done. Thank you very much for what's obviously a very complicated presentation for you. So thank you for that detail. Right, we're going to move on now to our representations, and we've got 4 representations against, 1 in support, 1 from the parish, and the ward member, Councillor Andrew Parry, who will make his presentation virtually to the meeting. Now, the 4 against normally would only allow 3, but I'm using my chairman's discretion this time because of particular circumstances in this case. Therefore, I'm allowing the 4. I think it's important that we hear those. So to kick off, I think it's Tanisha Williams is going to read these out for you. Over to you, Tanisha. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So the first objection is by Ian Stanley. I live at Pinecroft next door to the top of the yard, and I am on the front line of all noise, activity and water runoff problems. It may help to know that about the concrete contracting operation. There is no planning permission for this, yet we have to put up with the concrete contracting work being done close to us. We suffer from the noise of circular saws, nail guns and hammering constantly when the wooden formwork is being assembled and dismantled. The site plan does not reflect the actual use of the site. Work on the concrete framework has always been done outside of the space rented to March on a large area that is proposed to be for B8 use. The fenced area is used solely for scaffolding storage. Presumably, the formwork will have to stop in the future. Every time we have heavy rain in winter, when the ground is waterlogged, we are deluged with dirty water. The owner cleared natural vegetation from the east part of the site in 2003 and tipped coarse rubble from road scalpings onto the land. Due to the natural fall of the site, and as the rubble and scalpings are permeable, our permeable water runs beneath the surface onto our land. Large areas of our property are flooded and water subsequently runs onto adjoining properties, then onto the local stream. We know that the water also runs off the yard across other neighbours' properties, the White House bordering Barrack Road. We ask you to turn down the application as submitted, but should be inclined to grant the application despite all opposition. We welcome any conditions to stop the water runoff and reduce the noise of operations at the site. We ask that you require the installation of tanking systems that take all the surface water from the site. We request that the bund on our mutual boundary should be of soil, not scalpings, to create an impermeable barrier, or require the construction of an acoustic screen and install a drain along the entire length. The scalpings have been shown to be permeable and not suitable for a bund. 2 workers in the yard were heard to say that the current planning permission has been granted. About a month ago, clearance of huge quantities of scrap and equipment started over the whole site to prepare for its proposed use. The whole of the frontage has been re-landscaped and new steel fencing has been erected within the yard. Large quantities of scalpings have been delivered, presumably to create the new bund. We would like to ask councillors to request that the head of planning investigates this. The second objection is from John Cullen. There are a number of areas of concern about the information being given to councillors. There are numerous pages on consultee feedback repeated, but the responses from the 35 objectors, including virtually all local residents, has been compressed to 12 bullet points. Whilst you were given a link at the end of the report to the DC website for more information, we believe that more detail about specific issues raised by residents should have been included in the report pack to give more balance. The planning history section only gives details of any planning permissions granted, but does not cover the wider planning background. The comment in para 6.2 confirms that no formal action has been taken is correct, and it ignores the important fact that the yard has a very long history of serious planning breaches that started in 2002, but that DCC, EDCC and EA have stopped informally. No mention is made that a 2013 planning application for vehicle braking was withdrawn at the last minute, and an application for a depot was subsequently refused. You have not been told that EDC consistently refused any development at the yard. The officer's recommendation to grant permission goes against all prevailing planning policy for the yard. This policy applies to other commercial sites in Barrack Road. The report provided to you is complicated and contains a lot of information on vehicle braking that is no longer proposed, gives in full detail all the changes to the planning applications that are not relevant, and provides large extracts from the design statement that are also not relevant and are out of date and may confuse councillors. Councillors will note that there is little information on the proposed B8 usage or the car repair activity, a major omission. You may not have been given a site plan to study and have a look at the full planning application on the DC website for one. The design statement is well out of date, as the application has been with DC for 4 years and been amended. I have suggested that an updated design statement should have been sought, giving full details of the new uses so that councillors can have the facts that they need to make a reasoned decision. The third objection is from Pete Stimpson. I live next to the yard and front on to Barrack Road and have suffered from all the constant illegal commercial activity under current ownership. The officer's report states that it is best to agree planning issues by negotiation. I agree with this, but I wonder why Dorset Council have spent so much time and effort on this one site trying to get a planning solution. The sheer scale of resource devoted to this one site is beyond belief, and councillors would be right to question how this case has been allowed to go on for so long without bringing it to an end sooner. It would be welcome to bring the uncertainty to a close. The yard has clearly been outside of planning control for many years. Despite the case put forward by the officer to agree the application based mainly on planning policy, there are many other reasons to decline it, and it is noticeable that there is universal opposition to the application, including all adjoining councils. The application is devoid of any details, even estimates about the future use of the yard that will influence traffic volumes, noise, disruptions, and disruption to neighbours. The lack of information makes it difficult to understand how the yard will be run and the level of activity there will be. If you do feel you have enough information to make a decision and support the recommendation, I strongly support you adding the conditions suggested by adjoining residents, as we are the most affected by issues created by the yard. These conditions include setting hours of operation, using soil, not scapings, for the bund, or installing a robust acoustic screen, no non-B8 activity to be allowed in the new B8 area, the container storage to be just a single height. Lastly, in the design statement, the owner has stated that he will only accept conditions that would not affect his business. I would suggest that to restore some control over this yard, you set a limit of 3 months for the owner to accept all your conditions as proposed and ensure that all current work now being undertaken at this yard to implement the new site layout is stopped until confirmation of acceptance of all these conditions are received. This is an opportunity to restore planning control over the site, and it should be firmly applied by the head of planning under your direction. The fourth objection is by Mr. and Mrs. Parry. We live at Heathercroft next to the yard and wish to comment on a number of points made in the officer's report. Much weight is given to negotiating with the owner to improve aspects of the application to make it acceptable, but little weight is given to the very large number of objections from residents, local interest groups, and local councils who have a good knowledge of the local area. We do not agree with the officer comment about suitability of the road for more and large vehicles. The report fails to mention that Barrack Road is only 8 feet wide at its narrowest. There are few passing places, and the overhanging branches that are the main aspect of the amenity of the area are regularly torn down by large lorries. These branches are only 3 meters from the road in a number of places, and many are ripped out by passing lorries leaving the road blocked until they are cleared. This damage makes the trees liable to infection. There are TPOs on a number of trees in the road that are some of the oldest in West Pali. Some have already been damaged. The application seeks to bring containers up the road and store them on top of each other. We believe that double stacking will be a significant visual intrusion. Recent planning cases have confirmed that under B8 use class, tool storage racks and permanent storage of containers have been classed as buildings. So in the future, the owner could make a strong case to replace the double stacked containers with buildings. Problems of misuse of the site, noise, dirty water runoff and smell from the yard have been going on for 20 years. And whilst residents welcome a return to planning control, especially control of water runoff, we strongly believe that the application should be refused. If councillors are minded to agree with this application with conditions, we ask for hours of operation to be set at 8 AM to 6 PM Monday to Friday, 8 AM to 1 PM on Saturday, and no operation on Sundays. When illegal use of the yard was more prevalent, lorries from Romania would arrive in the early hours of Sunday morning. Under the Human Rights Act, we are entitled to the peaceful enjoyment of our property. This has been impossible in the recent years. Councillors may ask themselves, would you agree to this application if it was in your ward? If not, why agree to it in another? How could you leave so many Dorset residents and road users with unacceptable impacts of increased commercial use? And I believe the last objection is from Councillor Parry.
I think, Tanisha, you've got the 4 against there. The parish and the ward member come at the end, but you've got the one in support. So I think I'm right in saying we have the support next. Then we go on to the town and parish, and finally the ward member. Unless somebody wants to correct me on that. So if we can go on to the letter, the representation in support next, please.
Okay, so the first support is Jerry Davis. Good morning, Chair and members. As you can see from your report, this application has been in for a long time and has seen several important changes to bring it in line with our discussions with your officers. All of these changes are set out in what is a very comprehensive and objective report, which reflects the efforts made by both the applicant and your officers to respond to the various issues raised and to arrive at a scheme that is appropriate for this site. As the report confirms, much of the issue with this site in the past has arisen from vehicle braking / dismantling use that has been in existence for decades. That use has operated under a certificate of lawfulness, and consequently there has been no opportunity for the council to control it through the use of planning conditions. The current proposals not only remove the dismantling use, but also offers the opportunity to introduce reasonable additional controls as set in your report, and this represents a genuine net benefit in planning terms. You will see from your report that the application as originally proposed included retaining a smaller element of vehicle dismantling use. This resulted in extensive discussions with your officers, and the applicant was persuaded in the end to remove this element of the use altogether. That is a significant concession because suitable and lawful sites for vehicle dismantling are hard to find and therefore attract value. It was in the spirit of cooperation that the decision was taken to remove this element, even though it is considered to be lawful to continue that use. The applicant acknowledges that some of those who have expressed objection to this application would rather the site was not here at all. Whilst that is understandable, the reality is that the proposals represent a development of less impact when compared objectively to the one that presently exists. This is confirmed by the responses to the application from a range of consultees. Given this long established use, the proposals comply with both local and national planning policy in respect of the reuse of previously developed land. Moreover, the application offers an opportunity to bring the use of the site within reasonable planning control, whilst ensuring that it continues to make a valuable contribution to the needs of local business. I would therefore recommend the recommendation to committee. The next representation is from West Pali Parish Council, Miss Linda Leading. Dear Sirs, the 14-page officer's report attempts to convey the complexity and history in respect of this important site, which abuts a triple SSI of Heathland. The Parish Council has long been of the view that the public, as guardians of the site, need to ensure that the triple SI is fully protected. To ignore planning breaches is to dilute public confidence in the need for strict planning control. The more so in this area of strategic importance of East Dorset, where there are tremendous pressures to develop. Point 2. It is for this reason the Parish Council have raised concerns over many years about this site. Therefore, this current application has been studied closely and with concern. In short, it attempts a forgive and forget approach to numerous planning breaches that has occasioned distress and misery to the local householders and those concerned about the fragile heathland it abuts. Point 3. We are aware of the informal approaches of officers and members to negotiate alternative uses of this site, which we commend. The brutal fact, however, is that by regularising the site, its value is inflated and makes meaningful future negotiation meaningless. Rumour has it that the site owner places a value of £2.5 million on the site once regulated. Not a bad return for the original disregard of planning controls, if true. Point 4. The problem has been that the Dorset County Council original regulators were slow to seek enforcement measures and thrust by default claims of established use are made. Point 5. For this reason, the Parish Council urged that the recommendations be disregarded in this report for a year. Enforcement action be actively continued. Informal negotiations continue between the site owner and the council to seek agreement for a more realistic valuation of site value within the year. The matter then to be brought back to committee. If, however, the committee is minded to ignore public opinion, that strict conditions be imposed on future site usage. We note the officer's view that the scope is limited. Given the short time between release of the officer's report and the committee hearing, it has not been possible to take detailed views from outside planning consultants nor council experienced in these matters. However, informal discussions lead us to believe there is considerable merit in further conditions being imposed. We thank the committee for consideration of council views.
Thank you very much, Tanisha. And finally, we've got the ward member, Councillor Andrew Parry. Andrew, when you're ready, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to committee for looking at this application today, and to officers for the considerable body of work in bringing the application before you. I'd like to read to you, please, my response to the case officer on notification of today's meeting. So thank you for notifying me of the opportunity to put forward a submission to the Strategic Planning Committee meeting to be held on the 9th of August 2021. As you will be aware, both the planning status and certificate of lawful use for Briarswood have been the subject of much discussion in the parish for a considerable period of time. It is important for the committee to understand the significance of time elapsed since this matter was first raised and the frustration felt that it has not been addressed sooner. In fact, I believe it was my predecessor, the late Councillor John Wilson, who was originally involved in trying to address these matters, when the entire site was located solely in the then upper tier authority of Dorset County Council. Local government reorganisation in 2019 appears to have hampered progress in bringing about a conclusion, as the site is now split across two council areas. As the ward member for West Pali, I have heard and read a range of views from residents, many of which have been echoed in comments at parish council meetings, with some of the most vocal coming from those opposed to this application. Opinions expressed to me include a desire to see the Briarswood opinions expressed to me include a desire to see that Briarswood decommissions from all commercial use, with the site's close proximity to SSSI common land often stated as the principal reason for objection, together with Barrack Road's use as a popular area for walking and horse riding. The historic business activities, including the breaking and storage of commercial vehicles, required the site's operator to carry a waste licence, which, whilst being relinquished in this application, appears not to have appeased critics of the site's continued use for the purposes for commercial purposes. There is an expectation that if the application is approved, it would result in an increase in traffic volumes, especially commercial vehicles, on a narrow road in a sensitive ecological setting, and it has been stressed that this would impact on neighbouring residential properties and at Barrack Road's junction with the B30373. The likely hours of access and business operating at social hours have also been subject to debate. Again, I would stress to committee consideration of impact on neighbouring properties is necessary. In respect of Dorset Council's commitment to climate change and the environment, concerns for both mitigation of flood risk and water runoff and the risk of fire spread into adjacent heathland have been expressed to me as reasons for objection. As the West Pali ward member, if I can be of further assistance to committee in answering any questions, then I'd be very happy to do so. And thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Councillor Parry. Okay, now we've had all the representations. Does the officer want to respond to any points, any salient points that have been raised there? Hugh, have you got anything you want to come back on?
Sorry, Chair. The only point I noted, Chair, is a sort of minor point of detail. John Cullen's statement referred to a planning application that was withdrawn as having been made in 2013. I think the application that John was referring to was actually made in 2003, and I think if the statement's read in context, that makes sense in that the withdrawn application came before the depot use in 2010. But as there's not a list of all of the applications that have been submitted relating to the application site in the report, just think it's probably as well that that's noted for clarification.
Yes, good. Okay, thank you. So nothing else on that at all? Okay. No, thank you. Right, now we move on to any member questions on what you've heard so far. I've got some in the chat box already. The first I've got is Sherry Jesperson. Sherry.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Hugh, for that really very clear presentation. That was enormously complex, and you've explained it to us as well as we can reasonably expect. And I've listened very carefully, so thank you. I do, however, have just a couple of questions that I'd like to come back to and ask you if you could say a little more about. And the first one is the water runoff, because we've heard this described by the neighbours. And the second one is if you could clarify a little more about the bund and the landscaping. We've heard about trees being damaged by trucks coming in. That can happen. I also couldn't help but notice that the Leylandii is been killed by too harsh cutting in the second round of photographs. So I am concerned about the landscaping is not going to be a priority, obviously, for a site like this. That's inevitable. So could you say a little more about the bund, what it's going to be made of, whether it's going to be permeable? What about this hedge on the top of the bund? How is that going to survive? And a little more about the water runoff. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sherry.
The issue of water runoff is certainly long-standing. The residents to the south maintained that surface water discharge onto their land increased after materials were deposited on the site in 2002. The view that was taken at the time was that the placement of those materials did not involve a breach of planning control. My understanding is that you don't have an automatic right to increase water discharge onto third-party land, but that would be a civil matter between landowners more than a planning matter. Where reference is made to the potential for contaminated surface water being discharged onto the third-party land, again, landowners do not have a legal right to do so, and so that is a matter that falls within the EA's regulatory control, if indeed that is happening. I believe I've seen reference in fairly recent representations indicating that this matter has been raised and is being dealt with in conjunction by the EA. The approach that I'm seeking to take through the conditions follows the consultation response from the Environment Agency, which secures a level of control over the submission of details for approval and implementation relating to surface water management generally at the site, but those details have not been set out in the application documents before you. As regards landscaping, the materials to be used in formation of the bund, I don't believe are specified in great detail within the application, but conditions are proposed requiring site landscaping in accordance with the details that have been provided, including the details within the biodiversity plan. The biodiversity plan has been approved by the natural environment team as a means of securing overall biodiversity gain on the site. Trees along Barrack Road that are impacted by vehicular movements, I don't honestly believe that's something that we can look to control in conjunction with this application. Commercial vehicles have historically travelled along Barrack Road to this and other premises along the road, and if people are allowed to bring their vehicles along a private road, then overhanging branches will be impacted. It is a public highway in the sense that it's a bridle way. On the public road network, an exemption to tree preservation orders applies in relation to branches overhanging public roads. I'm not entirely sure whether the same provision applies to bridleways, but as I say, this is in addition a private road, and I don't actually think it would be practicable to put a height limit on vehicles to and from this site, given that there is a long history of large vehicles travelling along Barrack Road.
Can I come back, Mr. Chairman, just very briefly? Sorry, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
You're muted. I will. May I come back?
You're very welcome to come back. I said briefly. Thank you, Sherry.
Yes, very briefly. I understand exactly about the lorries, the trucks coming along the road. That wasn't my main point. On the subject of this bund, we put a condition. You're recommending a condition for the landscaping, which is in conformity with the biodiversity report, which is fine, but we've established that there isn't a very high level of biodiversity on the site anyway. I'm more concerned, so I wonder if we could, if others agree with me, we could tighten it, put something else in this condition that addresses the fact that that gives us the opportunity to look at and establish what this bund needs to be composed of. In other words, there's a significant difference between it being made of permeable materials such as soil or scalpings. And also, I do think we need to ask our landscape officers at Dorset Council to have some input into the creation of any hedge on the top of this bund, because it seems to me that this is a very difficult place to put a hedge, and that unless we're involved in this somehow, the likelihood is that we will not have a hedge that isn't able to survive very well. So could we just not now, I won't prolong this debate, but I would like that condition to be revisited with a view to being a little more specific about that. If we decide to support this, I would like there to be something more said about this bund, because I think that's easy for us to fix if we're going to go ahead with this. And I realise we haven't debated it yet. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you, Sherry. I'm sure the officers made a note of your point there. Okay, thank you. Right, the next question is from Belinda Rideout.
Thank you, Chairman. I must say, first of all, I am with Councillor Jesperson on the bund. I was going to ask the same question. I think it needs to be made of a material more suitable, especially if there's to be a hedge on the top. My main question, though, is I do not see any reference to control of operations on site, operational hours on site. I note there are some control with noise limits between the hours of 11 and 7 in the morning, but nothing else. And I'm thinking about the residents close by. I'm thinking about the designated sites with regards to noise and light pollution. Could you just clarify, please, Hugh? Thank you.
The recommendation doesn't include a proposed condition restricting either hours of operation or hours of vehicular movements in and out of the site. The reasoning for that is that the different noise limits are proposed for daytime and nighttime hours, and if those restrictions are adhered to, noise at the application site boundary should not be at a level that would be regarded as being detrimental to residential amenity in accordance with World Health Organization standards. On the bund, we could impose a condition requiring a specification for the bund. I probably should make clear that it is assumption on behalf of the neighbouring owners that the materials that have been brought to site in recent weeks are for the bund. I think they are as likely to be used in surfacing repairs elsewhere within the yard as they are for the bund construction. the material to be used in the bend would need to be permeable in order to support a hedge. The bend, I think, would assist with retaining surface water within the application site, but other measures could also be implemented, such as curbing, to control discharge. I don't think it's practicable to anticipate the bend, a hedgerow on top of the bend, if the bend itself is entirely impermeable to surface water.
Well, with due respect, Hugh, our landscaping team will obviously set the criteria for the bund.
I'm content that if committee feel that a condition requiring that specification to be submitted and approved, that's fine. A level of detail about the bend is contained within the biodiversity plan, but clearly more information can be required.
Okay, and also, Hugh, due respect, I'm not too sure that these noise limits are robust enough, because I've read in one of the concerns that a lorry turned up on a Sunday morning. I mean, I wouldn't like that if a lorry rattled in next to my property on a Sunday morning, then crashing around, especially if it's in the winter months when lights are on, etc. I do believe more control. There needs to be more control on the operational hours of the site. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Belinda. Can I just remind members to address their remarks through the chair, please? Thank you.
Sorry.
And also a reminder, we are still on questions of clarity. My next is Kelvin Clayton.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. An awful lot of information to take in, so this is just to clarify my own mind on the issue. Am I right in thinking that the site has a certificate of lawfulness but no current planning permission, and that the certificate of lawfulness was for vehicle dismantling, which is now which was suspended in 2018 with no plans to resume? I just want that clear in my head, if I can, please.
Yes, Hugh.
Sorry, Chair. Vehicle dismantling was suspended in 2018. At that time, the planning application that's now being considered provided for the continued use of the site in part for vehicle dismantling. I think it would be disingenuous.
So there was planning permission for the site already in place.
The certificate of lawfulness confirmed that in November 1992, the use of the site for the dismantling and rebuilding of heavy goods vehicles and the storage of scrap was lawful. A waste licence was subsequently issued, indicating permitting use as a scrapyard. The lawfulness of a use subject to a certificate of lawfulness that remains in force is to be conclusively presumed. So has the effect of confirming that there is not a requirement, an unmet requirement for planning permission for that development. The question on lawfulness of activities on the site is essentially twofold. One, are the activities within the scope of the certified lawful uses, or have they involved a material change of use? And two, whether if other uses have taken place, whether that has had the effect of meaning that the certificate of lawfulness is no longer in force. That is a matter that has been in dispute with the site owner since 2014, and it was discussions around the difference of opinion on that ultimately led to the submission of this application as a means of looking to authorise future use of the site.
I'm not sure.
Does that answer your question?
I'm any clearer. Let me just try one more time. I accept I'm probably being particularly thick on this. The certificate of lawfulness implied that no planning permission was required for the legal use given in that certificate of lawfulness. But there's no other planning permission. So it's now, we're reliant on the fact that there is similar use continuing that was given in the certificate of lawfulness, even though there's no vehicle dismantling taking place anymore, and it's not planned to continue, if that makes any sense. I'm not sure it does to me, to be honest.
I don't think it is right to say that there is no plan whatsoever to continue vehicle dismantling. If planning permission is granted and the site is operated in accordance with the proposal as now before you, vehicle dismantling would cease. But the applicant does not accept that they cannot resume vehicle dismantling without further approval from the planning authority. To me, the more important issues in terms of considering the current proposal are the status of the application site as previously developed land, the fact that the site has not been allocated or safeguarded for any other purpose in the adopted local plan, that it contains buildings of a substantial and permanent nature, and that the site has, whether with the benefit of planning permission or otherwise, a very long history of commercial use associated with it.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I'll leave it to that for now.
Okay, thank you, Kelvin. Thank you. Next is David Took.
Thank you, Chair. Councillors Jesperson and Rideout asked questions which I had in mind myself, but I'd just like to clarify a couple of things on both of those. The comment about the noise restrictions being sufficient to prevent disturbance to neighbours, as I think Councillor Rideout mentioned, certainly doesn't take into account lorries turning up at odd hours. And one of my questions is vehicle movement in and out of the site operational use of the site, and could a limit on the operational times of the site then minimise that disturbance? And the second question is, in terms of foul and surface water management, condition 3.3 requires that there be a scheme for the management and disposal of foul and surface water before operation of the site for vehicle repair, servicing and sales, and prior to siting any additional storage containers, it should be approved by Dorset Council officers. And would that approval, would that management of surface water include the bund itself? Because that's clearly important in the management of surface water control. So those two questions of clarification, please. And one more, what is the current land use category of it now? Is it B2 use, or does it actually have a land use category? Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. In terms of controlling vehicular movements, Barrack Road is not shown to be in either the ownership or the control of the applicant, such that I do not think that it is practicable to impose conditions or restrictions that would prevent or regulate vehicular movements along Barrack Road itself. Conditions could be imposed to control the hours or the number of vehicles entering or leaving the site over given periods, and indeed the hours in which they could do so. The difficulty I see with that form of condition is that if a lorry drives along Barrack Road in the early hours of the morning in order to get to this site and is unable to access the site, they will still have driven along Barrack Road and will likely then be in a position where they may not be able to turn around and depart. A vehicle entering this site has historically operated without any limitations in the form of planning conditions on the nature of vehicles that can travel to the site or the hours in which they may do so. In my view, imposing a condition to establish control on noise emanating from the site is a significant gain from the further granting of planning permission. I am less persuaded that conditions preventing vehicular access to the site at given time, at specified times, are either reasonable or necessary in the context of the site. With relation to the bund and surface water management details, the bund is primarily, as far as I'm concerned, proposed as a landscaping measure and as a means of increasing separation between potentially noisy and visually intrusive activities and neighbouring residential property. It is not, as far as I'm concerned, primarily being proposed for the management of surface water within the site. However, its presence will impact on surface water routing, and if other measures are not proposed, then it could be detailed as part of the surface water management strategy and under the condition. In terms of land usage, the lawfulness of use of this site is not clearly established. It was most clearly established by the granting in 1993 of the Certificate of Lawfulness. Scrapyards, vehicle dismantling, or scrapyards in particular, are certainly sui generis uses and so fall out with all other use classes. Vehicle dismantling can be undertaken as a B2 activity, but is generally, I think, more rightly regarded as sui generis. My view is that this site has for many years been in mixed use. There has been a range of uses, some of which fall within use classes, others don't. But in that context, the planning unit as a whole would have a mixed use rather than a single use falling within a single use class.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, Robin, you're muted, I think.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I hope there was a lot in there, David. I hope you're able to take that in.
Yes, I have. I'm not particularly convinced that restricting the hours of operation of the site is to be frowned on. And I think lorries would surely arrive at site by arrangement. You don't. Any industrial site doesn't have lorries just turning up ad hoc.
I think, David, sorry, butting in, might come out during the debate, actually, this sort of thing. So if you bear with us. Okay. So I want to move on to further questioners who've been waiting patiently. Thank you. The next is Shane Bartlett.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, members have beat me to some of the questions that I wanted to ask, and it would appear that it's the
You've gone on mute.
Thank you, Chairman. As I say, it would appear that the water management on the site is a concern to most of us, and also the noise aspect. So I just want a confirmation from the officer, because it is always a frustration of mine that when we deal with planning applications, that obviously the water management on development sites or pre-existing sites, when there's a planning application change for use of the land or whatever, that we often don't have that material detailed report in front of us, and it comes at a later date. So as I understand it, then the water runoff on the site plus the pollutant water that is possibly got contaminants within it from fuel and oil and other chemicals, that will come under the entire provision of the Environment Agency. And due to the significance of the SSI and the Dorset Lowland Heathland abutting the site, that we can have an assurance that the Environment Agency, in conjunction presumably with officers of Dorset Council, would ensure that there is sufficient mitigating standards and management plan that's put in place to accommodate that. My first question.
The response there, Hugh?
Yes, I think I would generally agree with you on that. The Environment Agency does have legal responsibility and enforcement powers sufficient to regulate surface water management within sites of this type, and has historically, my understanding is, has historically required the applicant or others operating at the site to implement measures to ensure compliance with those regulations. We have the ability to require the submission and approval of details in granting planning permission. The applicant could also have provided those details for consideration at this time, but hasn't done so. The consultation responses do not indicate to me that it's not practicable to implement a satisfactory surface water management scheme, and that is why, in my view, a condition is adequate. The details would need to be submitted and approved. There would be consultation with the Environment Agency and the flood risk management team on those details, and then the subsequent implementation of the approved arrangements would be a planning matter, but the ongoing management of the system would also be regulated by the Environment Agency.
Okay, thank you. Could I come back, Chairman?
Yes, okay, very briefly, Shane, if you would, thanks.
again, surrounding the noise limits, I'm aware of, my family had a haulage firm many years ago, so I am aware of the traffic movements, HGV movements with lorries, and the restrictions they have in their operational abilities to function, to make it a viable concern. And I do have some sympathy with the hours of operation that would pertain to this site. However, I'm struggling to understand why there needs to be an hours on this site from 11 o'clock at night to 7 o'clock in the morning. The type of business that's taking place on this site, I wouldn't normally associate with needing to be a nighttime working operational arrangement. And due to close proximity of the residents to the site, I've got a concern about that as to why those hours are in there. And also, could the officer give me an understanding of the decibel levels, the 55 decibel level and the 45 decibel level? I know that in previous applications, I've had things equated to, it would be a similar sound that you get in agricultural machinery. I just wondered if he could give me some sort of idea of what those decibel levels would be.
In terms of hours of operation, I did have discussions with the applicant on whether they wish to propose restrictions or how they would react to restrictions if I propose to implement them. It is clearly for the local planning authority to decide whether or not to do so. But the point has been made by others that vehicular movements have occurred at unusual hours at this site. That in part is because there is nothing to prevent that happening. I think it's probably fair to say that the applicant has looked to protect what they believe are their existing and established use rights. But if members feel that vehicular movements that would generate noise or that vehicular movements on the site within the noise limits that are proposed would have an unacceptable impact on residential amenity, either the proposal becomes unacceptable or alternative conditions need to be put forward to make an unacceptable situation acceptable. I'm sorry, I've forgotten the second question.
Now you put me on the spot. It was the hours of operation, decibel levels.
Sorry, the noise is quite a complicated topic to describe. The noise limits proposed are noise levels recorded over an hour-long period. Noise within that hour various noises within that recording period would be at different decibel levels. But the levels that I'm proposing reflect noise limits that the World Health Organization considers satisfactory on the outside windows of residential properties in which, for the nighttime level, with the windows open, such that the noise level experienced inside the property, which would be typically approximately 10 decibels less, taking account of the presence of intervening walling, that should not cause sleep disturbance to people within those properties. My recommendation is that the noise levels are set at the application site boundary, such that they could be monitored if need be from within the application site. If the noise levels are at that level at the site boundary, it is very unlikely that they would be breached at the facades of the neighbouring properties. And were they to be were that exceedance to then exist, it's likely that there would be another noise source making a significant contribution to the recorded level. In terms of, I don't. There are a number of things I could say in terms of what decibel level speaking in an office environment might equate to, but it is slightly misleading to look at those levels, because the limit that would be imposed, or that I'm recommending, is an average over time, and so there will be to stay within the limit. There would be points at which noise might be at higher levels, but also noise that might be at lower levels. But the purpose of them is to reflect World Health Organization guidance on reasonable standards of amenity, both in the daytime and the night time for residential property.
Okay, thank you. Chairman, I've got another clarification, but you've got 3 other members who want to ask questions, so are you okay for me to come back after they've spoken?
Oh yes. I mean, I've got two other members asked to speak here, and I'm hoping they're questions, because then we'll open up to general debate, and obviously you'll have the opportunity to come back, as indeed other members have already expressed that. So yes, of course. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next on my list is Councillor Dave Balwell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I thought actually it wasn't my turn yet, but thank you anyway. Just harking back to Councillor Clayton's.
Yes, apologies there. It was Alex. I do apologise.
Do you want me to continue, or shall I wait?
Alex, are you happy for Dave to carry on? You've waited patiently, so are you happy for Dave to carry on now, or?
Can I just have a very quick one, honestly?
Yeah.
Just a quick question. I read through, obviously, everything. There's no, bearing in mind where this site is situated, right adjacent to the heath, bearing in mind the problems we've had in the last couple of years with drought and such like, there is no mention of fire in the report. Do fires burning up of, waste wood and such like, do they happen on this site? And is there any way we can put in some sort of restriction? They do actually have Pali just down the road, so there's no reason why they couldn't get rid of their stuff there. But I am just worried that this is so close to the heath that if we had a fire there, this is an ongoing problem. This is because a site of mine before, we used to have illegal fires going on quite regularly. I just wondered why there was no mention. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fire risk was mentioned by Natural England in their consultation response, which is set out in the report, and also by others. I cannot say that there has never been a fire on the site, but it is not an issue that has stood out to me in the review of what is a substantial file of records of complaints and concerns raised about operation of the site in the last 20 years. The movement of vehicles along Barrack Road and activity at site could potentially result in a fire. And the site is located close to the European sites. But the ecological impact assessment that supports the application indicates that there will be no increased risk associated with the proposed uses, and I think that is fair. Natural England, the Natural Environment team, have not indicated that they disagree with that conclusion, nor have they indicated a need for mitigation measures to reduce the risk. So it is yes, it is a material consideration, but it is not one that hasn't been contemplated. But I don't believe mitigation is necessary to reduce the risk, which, if anything, I think would probably likely be reduced relative to the historic usage of the site for the uses that are now proposed.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Right, Dave Balwell. My apologies for the glitch, Dave, just now. Okay, over to you.
Not a problem, Chair, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak. I just want to go back to Councillor Calvin Clayton's point. I'm struggling also with a certificate of lawfulness. Now, Hugh, you did a fantastic presentation and an awful lot of content, so you'll have to forgive me if I've misinterpreted anything, but I got the impression that this certificate of lawfulness is in contention at the moment, and you know, it could be lost if there was any material changes of use. And I think you mentioned in your summing up that in your opinion, there were 2 changes of use, which would potentially leave the site to being net nil use. Now, that concerns me. And you also said a few times in your opinion, and that your opinion, so others could perhaps reach a different opinion. So I do understand your the reasons for being cagey there. So it does leave it open in my mind that this certificate of lawfulness is the key issue of the whole application. And it's almost as though that this planning application is an attempt to perhaps just get rid of the certificate of lawfulness contention and just make the site legitimate. Now, have I misunderstood it all at all, Hugh, please? Without putting yourself in an awkward position, I do understand.
I would certainly agree that the status of the certificate of lawfulness is in contention. The 2 changes of use that I referred to in the presentation related to approximately 50% of the application site area, not the entirety. This application would be relatively simple to deal with if it were accepted that the certificate of lawfulness as issued in 1993 remains in force. The applicant could have made an application for a further certificate of lawfulness, either in the same or in different terms, for either an existing use or a proposed use, and so far has chosen not to do so. I believe that's because they recognise that whilst there is an argument to present that use of the site is lawful, there is also an argument to present that the use of the site may not be lawful. I haven't concluded that the site has been rendered with in its entirety with nil use. And I believe there's clear evidence that for more than the past 10 years, some use has been maintained. And that an application to maintain those uses or potentially to secure a certificate of lawfulness relating to them could well be successful. But the precise terms of what those uses would be and how they relate to the site as a whole is not clear. What is clear is the site is previously developed land, has substantial and permanent buildings, is only accessed via Barrack Road, and does have a history of commercial use. The recommendation is made in recognition that there is doubt over the lawful status of ongoing and relative or usage that has spanned the period that this application has been with Dorset Council. Regardless of what committee determines today, the applicant can, and indeed anybody else can, if they wish to do so, make an application for a certificate of lawfulness of proposed use or existing use. That would fall to be determined having regard to available evidence and on the balance of probability. I have spent a lot of time trying to come to a clear conclusion as to what a fallback position on this site would lawfully look like. And in truth, I have found it incredibly difficult to confidently come to firm views on many potential uses. There are some uses that in my view would clearly involve a breach of planning control. There was a period where vehicle dismantling on this site was accompanied by operations which I believe clearly comprised crushing of vehicles, which in my view is quite distinct from dismantling of vehicles, and that enforcement action could readily have been taken against crushing activity. That, though, would not necessarily have rendered other elements of vehicle dismantling unlawful. Yeah, in the years that I've visited the site and the photographs that I've seen from the years preceding it, it is clear that certain activities have been maintained for a very long period on this site, and that elsewhere within the site, activity has waxed and waned and varied over time. In part, certainly in part at least, part of the reasoning why perhaps no enforcement notice has ever been served on this site is this is a fine distinction between when a material change of use has occurred and when it hasn't. March and Rowden have been at the site since 2004 and do not have, no planning permission has ever been granted specifically previously for their use. They have occupied part of the site and used other parts of the site effectively on the basis that their usage does not involve a material change of use. Although East Dorset District Council took the view that the depot operation in 2010 did involve a material change of use of part of the site. They did not come to the conclusion that March and Rowden's use similarly involved a change of use, or that if it did, that it was expedient to take enforcement action. And it is significant that in the certificate of lawfulness, the certificate does refer to storage of scrap. So there was a lawful storage use. The certificate did not make clear whether that was only secondary or ancillary to the vehicle dismantling, or was in itself a primary use. Now, unfortunately, we should not need to look behind a certificate of lawfulness to understand its meaning. So the terms in which the certificate were issued should be capable of being read on simply on the face of the certificate and any accompanying plan. There is no doubt in my mind that storage of scrap has been ongoing on this site, and storage of other items have been ongoing on this site for well in excess of 10 years without break. I also think that in relation to the 2010 depot use, that use was by its nature a temporary use. The depot was being used in conjunction with engineering operations for the installation of fibre optic cables in Bournemouth. There was a programme timetable in which that installation would have taken place. If it did involve a material change of use, it was intended to be a temporary change of use. Planning permission was sought. Officers recommended approval. East Dorset District Council decided to refuse the application. They did not then issue an enforcement notice. Had they done so, the applicant would have been lawfully entitled to resume any lawful use immediately preceding the change of use. They sought planning permission specifically for that form of resumption, but did not obtain it. But they also did not appeal against the refusal to grant it. I think their position would be that it did not involve a material change of use, and therefore they did not need to appeal in order to resume vehicle dismantling. When vehicle dismantling resumed, it was some time before I questioned whether actually there had been, if there had been one material change of use, surely there has been a second, and it was me questioning that point in response to complaints that were received in 2014 that has led to this planning application. It is complicated.
That's the understatement, I think, and thank you.
Chair, I'm sorry to prolong this because it's going on a very long time, but obviously I want to get this correct as well. So, may I ask just one more? It's related to Hugh's answer.
Yeah, if it's a very quick one, yes, please, okay. By all means. Yep.
Hugh, so certificate of lawfulness is still in place. Why the planning application? I know I'm not asking you to put yourself in the applicant's mind, but technically, perhaps I should rephrase that. Technically, they don't need a planning application then to carry on as they are, unless the certificate of lawfulness is under threat.
As
to phrase it like that.
as the site is today, with vehicle dismantling suspended, and other uses ongoing within the area, in accordance with how I witnessed them on my recent visits, there is not an active ongoing breach of planning control. Resumption of vehicle dismantling could potentially involve a breach of control, but it also might not.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very clear answer.
Thank
now,
you.
Okay, Dave. Yes.
Cheers.
Do you mind if I move on now? Thank you. Now, I've got, before I just move on to the next speaker, we've had a lot of questions, all very, very good questions, and I've got John Worth, Vice Chairman, on next. Is it a question of clarity, John, or you wanted to move into debate, please?
No, it was actually a question of clarity, if I may, Chairman.
Okay, yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you to the officer for his very comprehensive report, and bearing in mind the history of this site, it is very, very complex. But I just want to go back to points that have been raised about noise and time of use. Can we not, or could we not, adopt a belt and braces approach that we have both noise and time constraints on the site? That was all my technical question was.
Thank you.
If committee considers it necessary to impose a time limitation, then time limitations can be imposed.
Right, I think that's very clear. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, now I've got other speakers on here who've asked questions, so I'm assuming members are happy for me to move into the debating area. I presume that's the case. I'll take silence as a yes. Fine. So my next speaker then is Councillor Shane Bartlett. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, and I should take this point in time as saying thank you to the officer for his presentation, which was quite exhaustive and very comprehensive, and was obviously a very difficult matter. As things currently stand, at the start of this debate, I'm predisposed to support the application that's before us, but my concerns over that are, as been already highlighted within the questions and the confirmation aspect of our meeting today, is over the timing of the use of the site. I've still got a concern about the use of the site at night time, which I think is unreasonable in terms of the type of work that's going to be done on that site. I don't see that there is a need for that. And also the duration, the length of time during the daytime workings on the site from 7 o'clock in the morning to 11 o'clock at night, which I think is also quite an extended period. I would prefer it if the working times on the site were from 8 in the morning to 8 in the evening, which I think gives a reasonable day length work time and doesn't then impact too severely on the residents that are neighbouring the property. And I don't think at this point in the debate I could accept the nighttime working that is on that site. Okay, and I'll leave it there and listen to the debate, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much, Shane. Thank you for that. Sherry Jesperson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to say absolutely support what Councillor Bartlett has just said, but slightly more formally. It seems to me that we've had this question's come up a lot, and it seems to me that condition 4 on noise levels is not sufficient to address the concerns about the unacceptable impact on neighbour amenity from vehicle movements and from noisy activity. And therefore, I would like to propose that should we decide to accept this application, and I'm aware of the fact, Mr. Chairman, that we're not there yet, but should we decide to, I would like to propose, and I hope that Councillor Bartlett might second this, a further condition limiting the hours of use for this site from 7 a.m. in the morning till 7 p.m. in the evening on Monday to Friday, and no use at all, and none at all on Saturdays and public holidays. And this would be in the interest of the amenity of neighbouring residential occupiers. And I'm afraid I'll have to ask somebody else to provide me with the policy numbers, because this is East Dorset's planning law that I'm not familiar with. It seems to me, Mr. Chairman, that many businesses function very adequately when they're in close to residential properties with hours of restriction like that. We have many in villages around the county, and that if we were to agree this condition, that would go a long way to addressing some of the concerns that we've heard here. So that's a formal proposal, Mr. Chairman, if I may, that should we decide to accept this proposal, we add that further condition. I'm hoping somebody might like to second that.
Well, yes, I'm taking that now from what you've said as a formal proposal to accept the recommendation as on here with the condition applied. No,
I've actually said not. I very carefully didn't say that. I said, should we decide to accept it, that we would add that extra condition, because if I'm aware of the fact that everything else is jumping the gun, because we haven't really debated yet whether we want to accept it. But should we decide to accept it, I would like to add that further condition, if I'm allowed to do it.
Well, I need to just perhaps defer to Philip Crowther on this one. I don't quite know how we, because that's a proposal for a proposal in a way.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. My advice would be that can't stand as a proposal on its own. You need a proposal to either accept the recommendation subject to a changed condition, as Councillor Jesperson outlined, or a different proposal. I don't think we can have a proposal that is contingent on the substantive proposal.
Then I withdraw my proposal, and I would hope that you will give me the right that when we're at the point of making a decision on the substantive proposal, you will let me come back in with my amendment at that stage. Thank you.
It is noted, Sherry. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, but we know where you're coming from.
You know it. Yeah, you know where I'm trying to go.
Thank you. I do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, we've got Belinda Rideout next, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, this is very complicated, but from everything I'm hearing, it's blatantly obvious that this site has been operating out of control for a few years now, quite a few years, and we need to bring it under control. And the only way to do that is to bring this through to gain control under planning and planning conditions. I don't think there's an option to refuse this application, but I would be happy to support, but I do still believe that we need stronger conditioning with reference to the bund, and we need conditioning for operating hours, because I don't believe this has to be a 24/7 operation, and I do believe it should only be operating during the day hours, and I am broadly in agreement with Councillor Jesperson on that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Belinda. Shane, you come back on that now.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It was for a clarification on what Councillor Jesperson said, and I think broadly speaking, she and I are of the same view on this. But when she made her proposal, which obviously is falling by the way at the moment, because we need to change actual conditions when we come to deciding on this application. But she did say in that to not to work on Saturdays and bank holidays and holidays, and I presume she meant Sunday, not Saturday. I just want a clarification on that. Thank you.
Yes, Sherry, did you want to just confirm?
I certainly did. If I said Saturday, I certainly did mean Sundays and public holidays. Yeah.
Did say Saturdays, because I've written down Saturdays here.
Yeah,
so,
yeah, I was getting overexcited, Mr. Chairman. I apologise.
I can understand. Thank you.
Okay. I'll give way to somebody else in the debate. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Calvin Clayton, are you there?
I am, thank you, Chair. Just for Could somebody tell me what was the legal position if we refuse this application?
Anybody want to volunteer an answer to that? Hugh, can you give us some, can you enlighten us on this?
Sorry, Chair. If the application is refused, the applicant will have the right to appeal against the council's decision, but is not bound to do so. The use status of the site would be unchanged by the refusal of planning permission. You're not being asked to determine today whether a use of any or any combination of uses on this site is or is not lawful. Being asked to determine a proposal for the use of the application site. The applicant the site is in use, and I would expect at least that use to continue for the time being. I've no reason to suggest that March and Rowden expected to be departing from the site at any time soon. Other usage that might be commenced at the site, it would need to be assessed as to whether or not that involved a breach of planning control, and if so, whether or not it's expedient to take enforcement action.
So just to clarify, so if we refuse application, things could quite easily and probably will continue as they are at the moment, but still with a question mark over their legality. Is that right?
I think almost in the best case scenario, I would think things would carry on as they are. In a less optimistic mode, things could get, the applicant could resume vehicle dismantling to see whether or not the council will take enforcement action. The applicant could also introduce other uses, including B8 or storage uses, and again wait to see whether the council does or does not take enforcement action. Your decision today should not prejudice the council's position to react to future use of the site that is as yet unknown.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. David Took.
Thank you, Chair. I am, I think, persuaded that the benefit of bringing this site under planning control and getting some proper management of it is I think, quite a strong argument. The surface water issue, I think, is handled by condition 3.3, so that a scheme for management and disposal of foul and surface water must be approved. I'm not content with the noise limit as the sole limit, and I would think it'd be far better to have a condition on hours of operation on the site. What I would like to do, therefore, is to propose acceptance of the officer's report and that we grant permission, but subject to an additional condition, which is that the hours of operation of the site be from Monday to Saturday inclusive, 7 AM to 7 PM, no working on Sundays or public holidays. And that's a proposal I would like to make. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for that, David. Now, before we go on to the other speakers, do I have a seconder for that?
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to second that, Councillor Jesperson.
Councillor Jesperson, you're seconded.
Yes,
with the condition as added.
As I did, yes.
Okay, thank you. Right, now I've got, before I go on to the vote, I've still got a couple of speakers here. Shane, you wanted to come back?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, it was along the lines of the fact that the application we've got in front of us, as has been highlighted in the report, is in line with the local plan, and this also conforms and is in line with the MPPF document. So I don't believe there are sufficient material considerations to object to the application that's in front of us. There's been some talk about what might happen on the site in the future, and I don't believe that we can actually surmise what might occur or what might not occur and how that might affect enforcement at any future date. We have to deal with the application that's on the table in front of us. I might have preferred actually for work to continue on the site until 8 o'clock, but I'm content to concede to the 7 o'clock time frame, and subject to that, changing the conditions as has been proposed and has been seconded, then I'm going to be minded to support this application. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, thank you very much, Shane, for that. Alex Brenton.
Yes, Chairman, thank you. If David Took hadn't proposed it, I was going to propose on the same issue. I think we have to sort of accept that there has been a lot of muddle and, should we say, hands-off treatment in the past, but we have to have some sort of grip on this, and I think it is better to get some planning control in place rather than just leave it floating. And when I'm also thinking in terms of how many hours of officer time has gone into this proposal or this site for the last 10 years. We are at a time, you know, with the new council and everything else, it's time we sort of pulled it together a bit. So even though I agree that we should talk in terms of working hours rather than time, I actually had a quick look up, and the average diesel engine lorry driving into a site is 110 decibels. Now, then I thought, oh, that means they can't, but we're talking about an average decibel over an hour. So you only need to have 5 minutes of 100 decibels, but you could still have an average of less than 50. But 3 lorries turning up at 7 o'clock in the morning is enough to irritate anybody. So I agree with David Took, and I think we should push this forward.
Okay, thank you very much, Alex. Thank you. Now, I've just been reminded, although I was very aware of it, we're coming up to the 3-hour limit, which will be 1 p.m. I know we've got about 13 minutes to go, but I don't want members to feel that they're really being rushed. So are members happy to continue the meeting beyond 1 p.m?
Yes,
members in agreement?
Yes.
Yes,
yes,
fine.
Yes, yes, Chairman.
Thank you. I take that as read then. So we carry on. Thank you. Okay, next on the list is Belinda Rideout.
Thank you, Chairman. Just quickly, I was going to second Councillor Took's proposal. I think this is the correct way forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, no more speakers. Now, we have got a proposal on the table by Councillor David Took, and that is to agree the proposal as listed on the application, with the added condition that hours be limited to Monday to Saturday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m, no Sundays or bank holidays. So I think I've got that right. Proposer, is that correct?
Yes, Chairman, that is perfectly correct. Thank you.
Okay, and we've got a seconder. It's Councillor Sherry Jesperson. Is there anything else you want to say, seconder, on this one before we put it to the vote?
No, that's fine. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. If I may just make a comment, it's unusual for me, but I will make a comment. I went to the site yesterday. I drove down Barrow just to refresh my memory. I've been down there before, but it's a long time since I went down yesterday afternoon to have a look. and it's not a road I choose to drive down regularly, and obviously you can't go anywhere when you get to the end, because this particular site is right at the end of the highway. Beyond that, it's footpath and so on. So I can understand the concern about the hours of operation, because it is as you're going through Barrack Road, if you're familiar with it, for those that aren't familiar with it, it does have one or two other facilities on there, such as a salvage yard, and there's another vehicle maintenance and sort of waste disposal area, as well as residential. But as I saw it, most of the residential properties are beyond the other commercial activities. So then you've got a number of residential properties, and then you've got this right at the end. So I can accept members' feelings about putting a limit on the hours with the number of vehicles that might be passing. We don't have a figure to go on in vehicle movements. We've only got a guesstimate of vehicle movements, but I would think what members have said here is very acceptable. So having said that, we're going to put it to a minded to decision, and when we've done that, we'll ask Mike Garrity to confirm or otherwise. So I'm going to do the roll call for the minded to decision, and if you can just indicate that you've been present throughout the whole of the presentation and listened to the whole debate before you give your minded to decision, please. Councillor Shane Bartlett.
Thank you, Chairman. I have listened to the whole presentation and taken part in all of the debate, and I'm minded to approve, subject to the conditions as has already been laid out. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Dave Balwell.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've listened to the whole presentation throughout, and I'm minded to support with the conditions.
Councillor Alex Brenton.
Thank you, Chair. I have been present throughout and been listening intently to a very confusing case. I am minded to approve, subject to the very strict conditions, that including the hours that we have discussed.
Thank you. Councillor Kelvin Clayton.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've been here present throughout. I have listened to the debate and I'm minded to support.
Cool. Councillor Jean Dunseith.
I've listened to the whole debate and I'm minded to support, subject to the conditions.
Thank you. Councillor Sherry Jesperson.
I've been present throughout the debate, Mr. Chairman, and I'm minded to support. Thank you.
Cool. Councillor Mary Penfold.
Present through the whole debate, Chairman, and minded to support. Thank you.
Councillor Belinda Rideout.
Present throughout the debate, Chairman, and minded to approve with the condition or to support with the conditions on hours. Thank you.
Councillor David Took.
I've been present throughout, Chairman, and I support my proposal, including the hours restriction.
Finally, Councillor John Worth.
I've been present throughout and taken part in the discussions, and I'm minded to support it with the additional condition.
Thank you. So that's all members present voted, and my calculations show that's unanimous. Do you agree with me, Elaine?
Yes, I do.
So that's an unanimous minded to support with the additional condition as specified. So Mike Garrity, would you like to come on now and give your comment, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I can confirm that I have heard the debate. I've listened to all the questions members have asked of the officers and the responses they've received. I'm content that this application can be determined in line with the committee's minded to decision. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mike. Okay, well, we've cleared that item, and I think we gave it a thorough airing, and I really would like to say a special thanks to the officer Hugh Williams. He spent so much time on this, not just on the last few weeks or months, but obviously, as you heard, for years. And I think he's done a sterling job with his presentation today, which was really evolved. And we've had lots of very good questions from members. I think they've given a very good airing, and a result which obviously unanimous, I think, speaks for itself. So very many thanks to you all there. So moving on, item 5, urgent items. I'm pleased to say there are no urgent items. And item 6, There's no exempt business, as I understand it. So on that note, once again, thanking all members, officers and everybody that's taken part in this today for their input and their participation. I'm closing the meeting, just within the 1 o'clock deadline, actually, 12:54. So thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent meeting.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.